I'm going to invite responses generally to some of these questions. How do you respond to other people's anger? How do you respond to your own anger? How do you respond to young people's anger? Do you feel professionally prepared to work with anger? Have you seen any examples of how not to respond to anger? And that probably is all behaviours of communication. Immediate thoughts when you go.
It really depends on the context. How do I respond to other people's anger?
Yeah.
Is this someone I feel it's okay for them to express their anger to me? Is there some type of service being exchanged? What am I going to do to them?
Yeah.
Always, if I'm paying you, I don't expect you to be angry.
Yeah. Okay.
Always.
Yeah.
Young people, how do I respond to their anger? I respond to their anger calmly.
Yeah.
Why are you so angry, brother?
Yeah.
But if it was a big person who was being the same angry to me, probably we have tried and tested responses we've evolved over many years of existence.
Absolutely.
That I would probably employ rather than some of the newer ones I have to work with.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And then I think the point you made about responding calmly is a really important one, because lots of people don't do that. And as I said, again, I think a few people here, I worked in a behaviour unit in East London in the boys' school, and I can tell you basically, if someone's being angry, shouting doesn't make it better. Like, I think that's right. Aisha, do you have your hand up?
I was going to say it depends on what context.
Yeah.
So your brain goes into like fight, flight, or freeze, or calm. I think in our job roles, we're in that fight, well, I would hope to think that we're in that fight calm, and we want to support that young person, and we don't want to harm them further.
Yeah.
But for ourselves, when we're in a personal situation, sometimes that comes out the window.
Yeah.
And it can just be like, okay, how am I going to react? Am I going to fight or flight to the situation?
Yeah.
And then you don't reflect on it until after.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, okay, maybe I should.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
So I work in the prison system, and a lot of what we see and teaching that comes to officers is that a lot of your response to anger is driven by your fear. So when you become really scared, and it links into, not necessarily, but links into what you were saying about a perceived threat. So if you perceive a threat, you react very differently to a 12-year-old that's going, I'm like noise, because the maturity level of something. Actually, a lot of it is still noise, because the maturity level of something.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about the question, do you feel professionally prepared to work and respond to anger? Me, personally, professionally, I do.
Sorry, just to jump in, prepared is possibly not the best word in that sense. I'm just really equipped might have been a better word. But some people might just be like, they might be a bit.
Let's go with it. Professionally equipped. Yeah. And I do, and I think it took me a couple of years to get that in my career. Because I worked in social work and I worked with children and adults, and I just had to acknowledge, if you're going into a situation where somebody's very vulnerable and somebody's having a really crap time, possibly the worst time of their life, there's going to be that anger, and you haven't caused that. On the other side of that, if you have caused that, then you have to take accountability for it, and then you have to be able to justify it.
Absolutely.
So, personally for me, I do feel professionally equipped.
Yeah.
And even if you haven't caused it, we work in a sector for a reason, because we care and want to help that person's holistic development.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes, even if it's your organisation that may have done wrong, or society, you take accountability on your shoulders a little bit for that, to help that person get through that level of feeling.
Thank you. Yeah. Courtney, and then.
Yeah, so I think it's especially with young people, is understanding where that anger is coming from. That's what we do with a lot of kids. Like, so say if they have a shit day at school, or somebody stole something from theirs, it's like, I'd be pretty angry as well. If someone did something like that. So it's understanding that, relating it, but then we also go further, being like, okay, anger is an emotion. We're going through that emotion, it's fine, but it's the way that we display that anger, how it comes out that we need to maybe look at.
Yeah, just I think you saying it perfectly there in terms of partners in the group. There's that difference then between how the system interprets some of those young people, and there's lots obviously around the adultification of young women, and actually how the system perceives them, and probably not quite ready to. They're talking to maybe a 13-year-old girl, but they're thinking, oh, well, because of what you've done, you've been through, you're more at like an 18-year-old level, and then they're really kind of almost putting people into, even in the delivery system, don't do that because they're going with compassion and they're ready to or equipped to deal with any anger that presents, but then when they're in that system position, they're not getting that same kind of compassion, so that anger potentially is escalated somewhat.
And what about your own anger? And we were having a conversation at this table, and I was saying that I had a fairly short fuse when I was at school. And I think as I got older, and into sort of my 20s, it almost flipped, and it wasn't really a conscious decision, but I started not being angry ever. And I'm now trying to unlearn some of that, because it's totally appropriate to be angry at some points. You know, in your immediate life or in the world in general, just reading the news, you're like, that anger is legit, and I'm in the process of trying to express that in a way that's helpful. But how do we respond? Because I think Aisha, you talked a bit about when you're at work, when you're not at work.
Yeah.
Those responses are a bit different.
Yeah, I think when I'm not at work with my own anger, when I was younger, I think I would jump in situations. So I remember Lachlan saying earlier in one of the sessions that if it was the opposite sex and I turned to it, if I still saw somebody maybe being victimized by that individual, I would still jump in. I wouldn't think, oh, they're male, they're turned to it. I would be like, no, they're doing something wrong. And that would make me angry and naturally want to be a protector. And I would jump in that situation. I think how it's changed in my adult life is now I can assess risk a little bit more. However, I think when it comes to young people on my job, I think I still jump in with that anger because it comes from that protect. And it comes from that wanting to protect. But in my personal life now, I'm not so much that I'm going to jump in and fight, create the right things to do. I might assess, is this the right thing to do?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important.
I think in some of the roles that listen to a lot of people who are doing very similar kind of work, and I think you get it's being aware of being like you get desensitized to risk and anger as well. And how you cope with that when you get to the point where you've dealt with so many incidents that actually your fight or flight don't kick in anymore. And you go into a robot logistic kind of mode.
And trauma as well, generally, isn't it?
How you unpick that? Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing. These always, I always find when we run this with staff, these are the kinds of conversations we have that are really powerful. And my personal view is, I think it's working with a lot, particularly with parents, is if you offer parents the space to do their own reflective work, even just something like a conversation once-on-one like this, that then enables them to support, doesn't have to be parent carer or worker, that then better enables them to support the young people that they're working with. So, roll back to Cornerman a little bit. So what seems to have worked? I'm sure none of this will be super shocking to anyone. So what we did in that activity was let's name when we get angry, and let's talk about what makes us and why we get angry in those situations. What we're doing there is obviously validating and normalising, which, I mean, shock horror is effective, more effective than generally what happens is you've got an anger management problem, go over there and deal with it, and then we can have a conversation. And actually, it's a little bit about what David talking about, that kind of exile, because somebody's been angry, possibly legitimately, at maybe a sense of injustice, or they've been sensory exclusion on something they haven't done, and they get angry, and the teacher said, no, I'm not interested in dealing with this. That's not what we did. We invited those conversations, we invited those experiences, and I think we just sort of held them. Talked about the secondary emotion, reframing punch walls and doors as a form of deliberate self-harm. So, quick show of hands. Who's punched walls, doors, broken things when they've been angry or stressed? Yeah? So, nice show of hands there. When we do this, what do we get at? Have people found it helpful? And if it has been helpful, why has it been helpful? Anybody want to?
I don't be mad at what I really be mad at. I'm upset that my laptop screen broke.
Yeah. Does it? And so when you broke your laptop screen, what was?
Genuinely, I'm not angry anymore. I'm sad.
Yeah. But what what was breaking it, what were you getting out of it in that moment, before the consequences, but in that moment, what were you getting out of it?
My internet wasn't speed enough, so I don't know, maybe now.
It's like frustration, you're trying to get your frustration out, yeah, you're trying to release frustration, okay, yeah.
The adrenaline in my body, I needed to bring it back down.
Yeah.
Some
Great.
outcome.
So you're releasing adrenaline, yeah, what else? What do we get out of doing that, yeah?
Going back into school, what we got out of it, mine was punching the wall, and I think what I got out of it was broken knuckles and embarrassment from my friends that I broke my hand.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's the other side.
Like kudos.
Well, not kudos, more like idiot. Well,
I see, sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah.
you know, but I think embarrassment is one of that.
Right.
That's a physical manifestation of the anger, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're causing like physical damage.
Yes. So you're taking that emotional thing and turning it into a physical thing.
Yeah.
And maybe that physical thing is in the moment it feels easier to manage.
Yeah.
Yeah? What else?
Timeline, and there's putting your anger in it, and then you break something, and then the time after it, it's like 2 times separate.
Yeah.
You just feel very different.
Yeah. Is it a release?
Yeah.
Does it act as a bit of a release, maybe a bit of grounding?
Lots of time, the thing making it angry can't be dealt with. You know, you get something made you angry, you can't deal with that there and then.
Yeah.
But you can punch more right now.
Yeah, yes. Okay, so there's an element of like, I'm bringing control to the situation. Yeah, absolutely.
You feel powerful because you feel like that power that you
Absolutely. So if you're working with young people, I mean anybody here that's worked with young people that are engaging in forms of deliberate self-harm, it's widely known that what you don't do is try and stop someone self-harming. You ask them about it and explore it in a way that kind of normalizes and validates what they're doing and a way to make sure they're safe. And almost it's the reason, but when we talk about self-harm, typically we talk about things like cutting or other things that are like self-inflicted. But it's all the same stuff. It forms exactly the same function as all the stuff that we've just been talking about. When you punch someone because you feel out of power, because you're frustrated, because something's happening. You need a release, you need to be grounded. It does exactly the same job. It's not seen as a form of self-harm. Principally because everybody around you sees it as a kind of aggressive behaviour. So when we talk about punching walls and doors, that's how we frame it with young men. We do not talk about surprise, we do not talk about anger management strategies. It's pointless. They are totally symptomatic and reinforces the idea that you see anger as a problem to be dealt with than understanding why someone's angry in the first place. There is no other emotion that you can go into a GP and see a pamphlet about how you manage it. It doesn't happen with happiness, it doesn't happen with sadness, it doesn't happen with embarrassment. We only do it with anger. I think that's kind of weird. Why do we think this is working? So I talked a little bit about this. So anger is almost always problematized. It's rarely seen as an expression of distress or traumatic experience. I think we were talking a little bit about with your panel discussion earlier about misunderstanding mental health and misdiagnosing some of that distress. I talked about that, the punching walls being an act of the aggressive behaviour. There's a great book called Towards a New Community Psychology something. There's a picture of a biker leaning up against a tree on the front. That's mainly what drew me to it, to be honest. And it talks about spaces that do not lend themselves to an RCT, which stands for randomized control trial, which is generally how medical interventions are assessed in their effectiveness. It's a very, very rigid way of doing things. Actually, the projects that they talk about in this book offer friendliness, openness, patience, stillness, silence, and status. And my theory is that's what we would offer them. We weren't trying to fix their anger, we weren't trying to ask them to manage it, we were just holding it and listening. Then we'll zoom out a little bit. So, as we were talking a little bit about on this table, anger is very gendered. So there's a big overlap between anger, masculinities, or genders generally, and mental health. Where do we think that, in the middle of that kind of three-way Venn diagram, what's going on in there? Any thoughts? Just so it's not me monologuing.
It seems like quite a toxic place to be, potentially.
Yeah? We'll say a bit more?
Well, I think if you take two of those things on their own, they can be a quite sort of dangerous place to be. But the three of them, they can go in a sort of cycle and feed each other. You know,
Yeah.
you could be angry about, you know, to see somebody going against what you feel yourself, and feeling that question your masculinity. If you have a poor mental health, you can ruminate about that, and you ruminate about that, you get angrier, and
Yes.
before you get
So
to
there's a, yeah. Yeah, there's a cycle between those three things, yeah. Anything else? What do people think, if you're a person where anger is the only emotion you are kind of socially allowed or expected to display, and then you display that emotion, and then you're penalised for it, what do you reckon, what do people's thoughts are on how that affects your mental health?
Constant conflict, where you see people portraying something like you said that's been normalised or is accepted, and then you think, well, I'm making it masculine, but this is my response, and then when the response isn't to reinforce that, it's like you said, that toxic kind of area, and then there's a load of confusion that you're not learning anything.
Yes. And on the other side, talking in quite binary, gender binary terms, that if you're a person where you're not allowed to display anger because it's not socially acceptable, and then you get angry and you get penalised for it, what's the effect on your mental health? Is there?
There's going to be an effect on mental health because it's an emotion that you're displaying if you're not under shut down from it. So I think no matter what gender you are, and speaking as as a female colour, even that may play a part, like being a female, showing anger,
Absolutely.
how does that link to everything, how am I perceived, and then it goes into all of those emotions that might be left out about mental health. Because actually I'm putting on a bag and all you can see is anger. But that's my coping mechanism.
And also that might be legit, you hear the phrase angry black woman, and it's a really sexist, racist phrase, isn't it? And it's used specifically to marginalise the cross. This is the last slide, but this was just, there's a great, another little shout out to a book called Mask Off by a guy called J.J. Bowler. It's a really nice little short exploration of masculinity from loads of different angles. I think I'm talking specifically about men here, A, because this is the kind of what Courtney and I work with, but also because of the day. It's not, these issues obviously, as we talked about, aren't confined to men as a gender, but men are generally socialised into violence and aggression as children. There is research to show that children who are given toy guns often manifests in more aggression, both real and pretend. And boys are often socialised into violence and aggression to the point that by adulthood, aggression is the lingua franca for their experience of that. If anyone's not sure, so lingua franca is like common language. So when I'm on my bike and somebody drives past me really quickly at like 40 miles an hour, like really close, it's probably actually just because I'm scared. But it can't, like, it comes out as anger. But it's also really important to say, and this is where we try and strike the balance between understanding where men and young men are coming from in their responses, but not making them victims, but holding them accountable. Holding that element of accountability is that violence and aggression are also how men maintain their privilege at the expense of people of other genders. That's how we do it. Yeah.
But a lot of men also know the emotion that they're feeling. That's kind of, I know a lot of people say, let's dig deeper, let's have a conversation, let's talk about it. But as men, I'm not saying like the younger males, but especially a lot of the older males that I work with, they understand the emotion, but actually, to be masculine as a real male, they can only show it through anger.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
They don't want to show tears, or
No.
they don't want to show another emotion, but they know what that emotion is. So it's like we as a society have got to a point where it's not okay for a man to show emotion, but then we say they're too tough or they're this or they're acting, but that's what we put on them. We're like, you need to man up, you need to be masculine, but what is it to be a man?
Yeah.
What is it to be masculine?
Absolutely.
Do you sex that?
That's absolutely. I think that kind of what Ruth was talking about bind, is that you do this, you're still damned if you do and damned if you don't. I think we had a few conversations about like crying. Like, is it okay to cry? Maybe in private, definitely not in public. We had conversations about strength. We talked about like role models and who are your role models. And quite often people would name their parents. And like, okay, so why do you name this particular parent? Oh, because they're strong. Why is it? Tell me about strong. What do you mean by strong? They're like, oh, because they're quite mentally tough and they get on with it. They can carry it. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And I was always very careful to ask, is there a strength in being vulnerable? Is that a form of strength? And it was never meant as a rhetorical question, it was a general question. Like, is there a type of strength in being able to be emotionally vulnerable in somebody in front of someone else?
Yeah, first of all, we spoke about men's anger, and they're made of okay to feel angry, and then they get penalised for having an angry response. And I think what you were describing, Aisha, is men also have not anger, they express not anger, and they get penalised specifically for expressing not anger. So it's the duality of it's the only thing that's okay to express, and it's also terrible to express.
Absolutely.
How do we reconcile that?
That vulnerability. There's so many triggers and traumas that come with males and the perception of growing up and learning transitions that if they show a different emotion, is that emotion then going to be used against me? Are they going to be accepted for that emotion? What's going to come with that? So is it easier just to shut off and not show emotion, then later in life that may come out as anger because they're harvesting all this emotion because the system, whether that's through education, the council, whatever that may be, the criminal justice system, at work, hasn't done them right to the point where they're like, I'm not showing my emotion no more because every time I do, I get let down. There's somebody or something letting me down. So I'm not going to show it. And then like you said, when you said the angry black female, it goes back to the angry black male. Or the angry male, where it's like, okay, why are they like that? You know, or if you see a bigger male, or you necessarily think, oh, they're showing anger because they're bigger and they're shouting. But just because their body and their physique is bigger, and they're shouting about something, we're forgetting that there's human behind that with every other element.
And the consequences for that, for older black men getting more severe as you get older, because in school it might be in isolation, it actually become an outlet. It's arrest, prison, Section 11 Mental Health Act. You know, those things are very frequent common occurrence, and it's statistically much likely, right?
Like I know we're talking about males, but I remember growing up, my mum always saying, don't show emotion. You know, don't show emotion in the workplace.
Right.
Don't show emotion in school. Like if you've got anything to talk about, you come home, you talk about it, but don't show emotion. Just get on with the job, get on with it. If you do have a breakdown, it's, oh, why did you show that? Rather than it's okay to show that. Because people are scared of what comes with that. So I can understand as a male, people are probably scared what comes with showing your emotion. Where does that leave you in that situation?
Yeah. Thank you. We've got 10-15 minutes for general questions. The other thing I say, Abdallah is here, who not only is part of the conference organising committee, but also was a Cornerman graduate, I don't know if that's the right word, came to Cornerman a couple of times, and it's been amazing having your kind of input throughout this whole thing. So we'll move into we'll wrap that up and do slightly more general, open up for questions that people were interested to ask, probably myself or Abdallah, about the project. I just wanted to create a bit of space for that, if anyone has it.
Do you still take people on?
Say again?
Do you take young males on at Empire through the firewall?
Yeah. So we've got the one-to-one program, mentoring program, so that's a 20-week program. And yeah, that referral can go, it can be for anything. And it's self-esteem, confidence, all the way up to sort of fully in the next time.
Is there age group?
8 to 25. So right across the board.
And is any of this style of work like groups, or is it done in one group?
This was all groups. What I found fascinating was when we went to the schools, when we went to the BBA, and that was really sort of, then we're in their sort of own zone. And that can go one or two ways that I found in the boxing sessions. Because they're not in a boxing like gym, like our gym, where they're all sort of get on with it. Sometimes they have a habit of messing about in school. But we found a real positive influence, and one of their teachers actually, one of their support teachers came in the room as well, and hearing that, his stories, he then became more relatable to the young people, I think, built a stronger relationship with them.
I think we learned something quite important for that, which was that because that particular member of staff was present at a lot of things. We were doing football, because this was post-COVID, obviously. So we were doing football instead of boxing, and the sessions, and he was very present. He was like, no, you moan about teachers, like it's fine, blah, blah, blah. And by the end, we saw some really, really amazing outcomes in terms of reduced presentation stuff. Like reduced isolation and people showing kind of leadership and stuff. And my personal opinion is what happened is because he said to them it's safe for you to moan about those things and complain about those things and getting you angry on a day-to-day basis around teachers in school. Their relationship with him changed, and by proxy their relationship with the school as an institution changed. So now, so from that we were like, right, so when we do this in schools again, we need a member of staff present, and the school has to have some buy-in, because what they can't do, and I'm saying this slightly cynically, I think a lot of it's down to resources, but what schools happen, for good reason or for bad, is they have a group of students that they're struggling with, they ask someone external to come in to run an intervention, and they just expect magic to happen. And you're like, no, that's not how it works. Like, you need to have some buy-in to this process. And I think that's what we took away from the game.
How restrictive is the funding models been to support this kind of work? Because I think what you're trying to do on such a scale as well is fit a model that you know works, and you've got really good tried and tested evidence, and then sometimes a funding institute with bend of will to be like, this is great, but these are the outcomes we want to measure. So I'm just really, because I know you guys have done that really, really well.
Yeah, it's difficult. There's always a thing around funding. But yeah, that's the thing, because I would like to carry on. I love to carry on. I enjoyed it. It made me sort of confront some of my own ideas to talk about. Growing up with 3 brothers in my household, 4 very hyper angry boys. But what I found interesting, it wasn't until I was talking to my brothers later on, is that each one of us would go to my mum separately to let out those emotions that we felt like we couldn't do for each other because we were too busy trying to be strong macho men. But now it's sort of open those conversations, and we're able to have those conversations more openly. But yeah, funding is an issue.
I think it's really probably be able to do it again in the future. I think it's just it's definitely something that you have to like. Yeah, it's a shame that, like Paul said, the comic relief thing was a 3-year pilot.
Yeah.
But I think the outcome seems really interesting as well, because that was something that we were like, what's going on here? So we were using. Do you want to come in on that, Philip?
You and there was another group in London.
Yes.
It's on YouTube, I think.
Yes, there is.
A group in London, and they recorded each other. And there was the idea of they were giving out questionnaires, and the kids struggled with them, partly because the questionnaires were really confusing. It's really good. Do you feel useful? It's hard to feel useful when you're 12 or 16. So this is a hard question to answer. But the idea you take came up with is that the effect is sort of pre-verbal in a sense, the sort of the stuff coming out of the questionnaires and the way they were talking about it is I got a punch bag for a couple of weeks. Wasn't shown in how much they improved in terms of anger, isolations. Yeah. The results, their behavior improvement wasn't reflected in the explanations they gave.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's really important. So that outcomes is so we were using these outcomes that we said to the funder, and they were filling them in, and then by the end, most of them were worse. We're like, are we making this worse? And actually, I think we were. I think there was lots of things that possibly wasn't explaining how to use forms properly, as Dana said, and also I think the word used there, pre-verbal, was a really powerful one. I think that was there's a lot of stuff going on underneath, and we were hearing this feedback from parents more than anyone. They were like, oh, he's just so much less angry at home. And I'm like, okay, so why is that? And we would ask them, okay. And they were like, oh, yeah, because I can come down and punch a punch bag a couple times. And I'm like, okay. I fully hear that you've made the connection between coming here and punching a punch bag and you being much less angry at home, but you've only been coming for 2 months. That's quite a significant behaviour change in a short space of time, and punching and punching doesn't feel like enough, like there's something else.
Can I provide a hypothesis?
Yes, please do.
I think it's not necessarily as much punching and punishment as you're coming in and you're sort of getting used to your body, getting more dexterous in a sense. So I know in my experience, it's quite hard. So sometimes I struggle with there's a big group of people and moving around, just feeling more safe and secure in your body and having confidence that I could be able to do simple stuff like, oh, I'm doing this game, so if I'm moving around, I know I won't bump into anyone accidentally or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And that's really hard to make. When funners are like, what outcomes do you use? You're like, they can move around and not feel opportunity, and they're like, what?
And this is the stuff, like I said, it's the non-verbal stuff as well, I think physically being there and the instructors noticing that change, and like you said, that feedback from the family in terms of that distance travelled for young people, and I think that's what we really struggle with in terms of that system thinking, isn't it, to try and move the trajectory. Funders is kind of saying, well, if there's enough trust in the system to just pay for the things that we know have done really well, and we validate them in a way that we can then evidence back to them, cost-saving measures, all of those kind of things, but I think there's lots of things that competition isn't there that sometimes need within a career competitive environment that then jump from you to the level that's
Yeah, and it's that collaborative work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Obviously, in some terms, I guess, we'll go for the same pot of money in different ways. But the forefront always is the young people who are all fighting for the same goal, working with young people. So I hate when it's that restricted funding of, like, just collaborate more and put our funding together and aim to help more young people. That's what needs to be in the heart of it.
I think sometimes that makes it difficult is the fact that funding is for a certain amount of time, a certain amount of period, but actually what traumas are we causing for that young person, more detrimental impact that we're having, where we're saying we'll tick boxes for this period, and then we've got to move on, or there's nowhere to move on to people have to drop you. And it's like, we pilot stuff like you stuff, and as professionals sat around today, we know what works. It's just actually, we are then restrained by those above us who are telling us whether we can and can't implement that. But then we're the ones on the ground seeing all these triggers, traumas, emotions, because we know what we need to do, it's just, we don't have capacity to do it.
Do you feel comfortable talking about any of your experiences, or like?
Cornerman?
Yeah. Just from the, I guess I'm conscious that we've had a lot from the adults.
I came twice. Once was 12 weeks, the other was 6 weeks.
Yeah, post-COVID, sure.
The last time I came a bit late, I think my friend at school was like, there's boxing lessons. Bristol boxing gym. I was like,
That's basically how we sold it, wasn't it? Free boxing.
yeah. I was like, why not? I don't have anything to do on a Thursday afternoon. So I turned up. Yeah, I think the boxing was quite fun. I think the atmosphere, I think something we were talking about PE lessons is we'd actually enjoy PE if there wasn't such a angry environment. So it's nice to go somewhere and we were all like boxing and in a sense of quite competitive, but also felt supportive in the sense we were trying to get better. So that was really nice. And also the sessions, the talking sessions, I would actually say they weren't long enough. What would happen is we would box for like 1 hour, 30 minutes, and then Tom would be like, let's start talking about anger. And he'd get like 3 sentences in and we'd go home. But when we had time, Tom to introduce the topic, people were quite open, and there was one member, I think you'll know what I'm talking about, who really sort of led the sessions and helped the others in the group open up as well. I think we were really lucky with the group we had, in a sense. I don't know about other sessions, but we really had a group that clicked, both times.
I think that was the interesting thing, was that group that we came to was we really struggled. So we worked 11 to 25, and we really struggled with, we did 11 to 15, and then a 16 to 25 group. And I don't know what other people do, so we really struggled about getting that whole range through the door. We had And the really big difference, I think, between those two, or at least between the youngers groups that we've had and the one that I've dealt with apart, because of the youngers, it was much more like structured, like let's work through this workshop, what have you thought about, what have you learned, and then we'll go, and then go home. Whereas with the olders, it became a much more of a peer-to-peer relationship. And I think, because this was when Akko was coaching at this point, and we had somebody who'd been brought from support accommodation with his support worker, and then, me and the coach and the support worker were getting involved in the conversations, and it didn't feel like, it wasn't like a group of professionals running a workshop, it was a group of adult men connecting. I think that was the difference between those two things. I think that worked. That's what worked.
The exercise was good as well. We had good selection. Shoulder tags, classic. I think there was one with the feet where you had to get people's feet. That was so fast. All the games were great. The training cycles was really good. That's a big part as well.
Do people find that helpful doing that shoulder tag exercise first? It'll make a difference. I think after lunch, a bit of energy.
I personally used to go out with this brownie, so.
Cool. We'll bring it to a close. Any final thoughts, reflections, anything in the rules of throw in at this point? Thank you very much for your participation.